Speaker, some time ago, a judge asked me to bring this bill with some type of floor on the amount of fine that we give for misdemeanor marijuana, which is 3 ounces or less. So here we are on the floor. It's a $300 fine, a minimum. A judge can still do whatever he wants to do with jail time up to $1,000. Judge still has the discretion to do as he pleases. The police officer who pulls somebody over has the discretion to give the ticket or not. People are not being arrested when they have misdemeanor amounts of marijuana, usually unless something else is involved, another crime. And then the prosecutor has discretion on whether to go forward. So if they get to the judge and they get convicted, a $300 floor fine is reasonable. Some people wanted more, some less. No judge has come to me, and I've been contacted with lots of judges and said, I don't want this. I present this bill from House Judiciary and Committee, Judiciary and Rules Committee, with a due pass recommendation. It passed on a 10-4 vote. The Police Chiefs Association, IDGOP, supports this bill. The Sheriff's Association supports this bill. The Fraternal Order of Police supports passage of this bill, as does the Ada County GOP supports this bill, and the state GOP with resolution supports being tough on marijuana and keeping marijuana from becoming normalized in our state, the use of it. Not long ago, all 50 states in this nation outlawed marijuana. Now, and then they got, I say, my words, suckered into by the lobbyists, the promises of great money for the state and the taxes. This is a great medicine, all these things. Tell me what state, anybody who debates against this bill, what state is a better place because of the passage of marijuana legalization? I submit none. We have the science on our side now that shows what really happens when somebody uses marijuana legally often in these states. 12% of all fatalities in these states that have, traffic fatalities in these states that have legalized marijuana, have marijuana in the system of the driver. We have a lot higher usage. I think it's like 158% increase in usage when you legalize the marijuana. Those of us who know marijuana users who have used regularly, it does not benefit their lives.
Yeah, you're a lawyer, sir.
And we get to see how the brain changes, particularly in children now. The science is coming out because of the use in all the states openly. It changes them permanently, brain injury to children. And on adults, it changes how they behave. And keep in mind, in the 1960s, pot potency was pretty low. It took quite a bit to get really stoned or impaired. Now the rate of potency is so high that the stuff that you buy is scientifically improved.
I was in Germany and they legalized marijuana, and I met a couple and I said, well, do you buy it there? She says, no, we just grow it on our patio in our apartment.
Behind the wheel of a car, behind machinery at your work.
That's Germany.
And that's a problem. The half-life of alcohol is not that long. I had some people say, well, it's like alcohol. No, it's not. Alcohol has a short half-life of a few hours. A pilot who flies a 767 plane can drink pretty much all he wants 8 hours before the flight. And if he hasn't had a drink for 8 hours, he can fly hundreds of people around the world in that jet safely. And if you take marijuana on a weekend, you're still going to have that marijuana in your system throughout the week. Sometimes up to a week later, that half-life of marijuana is still there. And when I say half-life, I mean it's still impairing your ability to safely operate a vehicle,
Canada
heavy machinery at work, that type
Washington,
of thing.
Oregon,
so it affects all areas
Montana,
of our community. And we see societally that has not made states a better place to live. I submit Portland,
Utah,
Seattle, San Francisco, and other states all across our country. You've been there, you've seen what's happened. Hold on a moment.
You're a lawyer, you're wanting to fill the jail.
So the actual effect of having marijuana legalized and available 24/7 in a society is very negative. Or you can have it de facto legal. And how do you mean de facto, in fact legal? By not enforcing the laws you already have on the books.
Over 600,000 are arrested and put in jail, mainly young people, and it's a felony.
Our police want this because they have a tool.
They don't vote.
They need this tool to better fight marijuana use.
Why? Smoke pot. Got arrested.
Regular in our state, meaning everybody starts using because we're not being fined much. Not much is going on.
That's another form of voter suppression.
So I want to stop that. I want to help our police. On this following the science, I have a couple notes here. I'm just glancing at.
Science. pseudoscience.
Regular use of marijuana, you read this Wall Street Journal, New York Times, read these articles recently, increases symptoms of bipolar, depression, paranoid thinking, violent tendencies, and domestic
what about
abuse.
Antidepressants?
Since 2005, 60 mass shootings have been perpetrated by marijuana users. I'm not saying you become a murderer or violent because you use marijuana, not at all. But that's just science, that's the fact, that's what we see. You want to take a strike at suicide attempts?
Scott, come on.
According to data, suicide attempts are increased sevenfold by regular marijuana users.
Anti-LGBTQ
5 times greater for completed
transgenders.
suicides by marijuana users than someone who does not
demonize
use.
that, Mr. Scott.
And then we have all the promises of how wonderful things are. We have to bring this up because it came up in committee. Well, legalize it, don't enforce it, life will be good. So California, one of the leading states to legalize marijuana, said, well, it'll stop all of those police raids that we have to do, and all those violent
they got
times
49 million people
crash
there.
down doors, go in and do search warrants. Well, guess what? They're still doing the search warrants in California because the taxes on marijuana are so high. The criminals make a lot of money by doing underground grow operations in homes and buildings around the cities and in the country. So the police are in there with the same gear, the SWAT gear, breaking down doors to enforce tax law.
You can't grow it and sell so many ounces.
The marijuana itself.
Colorado, I think, made what,
just one more promise that didn't come through.
In reduced.
We had some testimony committee that, $300, that's a hard thing to do to these poor people that smoke the marijuana. We don't want to do that. And there's court costs on top of that whenever you're convicted.
Baloney.
But in my view, it's a pretty good deterrent to prevent normalization of marijuana in our state to have this floor. But let's look at the cost of the user of marijuana. What does that cost financially to the user? The average cost of an ounce of marijuana in Idaho, I'm told, is $240. While the THC concentrate sold in Ontario pot shops right next door here in Oregon,
at least 27
average $50 per gram.
Sure about that?
There's 28 grams in an ounce of marijuana. That means an ounce of concentrate has a value of $1,400. That means 3 ounces has a value that they pay of $4,200. So cry me a river about the $300 fine. It's not too high. It'll give every police officer a little bit of help. So, Mr. Speaker, help keep this state great by keeping marijuana out.
Keep it great. Is that same as a
Thank you, gentlemen, for the motion, for the debate on the motion. Gentleman 28.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to debate in favor of House Bill 7.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will strongly support any legislation that's intended to slow or stop the drug trade in Idaho. Will this do that? I really don't know. But I'm willing to give it a try and make possession of an illegal substance hurt just a little bit more. As most of you know, my nephew was killed in an automobile accident 2 weeks ago. He was driving back home, his home, in El Paso, Texas, after visiting his parents in Kansas over the holidays. We've been unable to find an official automobile accident report, but my brother did a little poking around trying to discover what had happened while they were in New Mexico in this little town where this accident was near. Apparently, a Toyota vehicle, we don't know what kind it was, crossed the center line as he tried to get away from them, struck him full on the driver's door and pinned him in the vehicle for over an hour while EMS was cutting him out. By sheer chance, my brother ended up talking to a law enforcement officer who had been on the scene of that accident while they were cutting Travis out.
This is Rick Cheatham.
He told me,
District
my brother,
28A.
the occupants of the other vehicle were dead on
he won by
at
40% of the vote.
But while they were investigating, they noticed drug paraphernalia in the passenger compartment of the vehicle. When they opened the trunk, it was full of drugs. If this minimum penalty can increase the awareness of the risk drug users take and the danger they put us all in, and prevent one accident like this in Idaho to you, a friend, or anyone else, it'll be worth the small inconvenience we're placing on the judiciary. I ask you for a green light on House Bill 7.
Thank you, gentlemen. Further debate on the motion. Gentleman 3.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate in favor of the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In committee and debate, we heard a number of compelling stories about some people that have served our country that use marijuana medicinally.
Yeah.
Currently, marijuana, and it was very compelling debate. I understand the issues that they're going through. However, this drug is illegal in our state, and we need to take a strong stance against that. This creates just a minimum fine that will hopefully act as a deterrent that our law enforcement is very supportive of, because we have a number of states bordering us where, again, I don't think we want to implement those states. So I would ask for your green light on the bill.
Thank you, gentlemen. Further debate on the motion. Gentleman 17.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate against the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
You know, sentencing for possession of marijuana is already strong, it is already vigorous, and it is already tough in this state. Defendants don't get an easy break when they possess marijuana in Idaho already. The evidence that we heard at the committee is there's already the equivalent of a mandatory minimum. That mandatory minimum is court costs, $200. That's the first expense. The second expense is $100 that the defendant must pay for the testing of the product of the substance that was found in the defendant's possession. 100 hours of community service is then given as a punishment in Ada County, and the defendant must pay for that. Has to pay the $60 for workers' comp, and has to pay $25 a month for administrative costs until the community service is completed. There are also expenses for probation. $75 a month to probation and parole for the defendant to pay as an expense to reimburse for the cost of the probation. In addition, treatment and counseling are also part of the sentencing process. And that treatment and counseling can cost a lot of money. Now, I've heard it said here that many of these defendants are abusing the marijuana product or whatever. Well, they're going to get a lot of counseling, they're going to get a lot of treatment, they're going to get a lot of probation supervision, and that costs them money. They're the ones that have to pay for that. And so if you take too much money, so the judge then looks at the particular individual, knowing that all these expenses are going to have to be paid for out of the pocket of the defendant. The judge looks at that and says, okay, what should the fine be, or should there even be a fine? And makes that determination. Because you may have somebody who's 19 years old and makes $15 an hour at a fast food restaurant, and an additional fine would be a significant burden and would not help the whole situation, because you want that person to complete the probation, you want that person to go through the treatment that they need. This is really why our misdemeanors do not have a minimum penalty in them. And if you look at all the misdemeanor statutes, you'll see that there is not a minimum penalty. Misdemeanor crimes which actually hurt people, actually cause harm to people, such as a battery. A battery is when you push somebody or you punch somebody. That is a misdemeanor crime, and it does not have a minimum fine. Attempted strangulation, assault, domestic violence, stalking, misdemeanor injury to child, disturbing the peace, sexual exploitation by a medical provider of a patient, all do not have a minimum penalty. It's up to $1,000 or 1 year in jail. It might be 6 months in jail if the 1 year isn't specifically mentioned in the statute. Nor do property offenses. Property offenses don't have a minimum penalty. Property offenses such as petty theft, it's up to the $1,000. In general, this possession offense is not a violent, complex crime with a human victim. Certainly, if you're driving, you're going to get a lot more than a misdemeanor if you're driving and you're under the influence of any drug or any alcohol, and you cause an accident. Forget the misdemeanors. We're not talking about this penalty. You're probably looking at a felony, and you're probably looking at very serious jail time. It appears that the punishment that we already exact for this particular crime, and I believe there's an actual publication that's been passed out, in which another speaker will probably talk about, shows that we are strong in Idaho. We're already tough, and we're already vigorous. And adding to the punishment that is already there is doing nothing more than making it less likely that rehabilitation, that the defendant can pay for their rehabilitation expenses, their counseling, their treatment, which can cost a couple of $1,000s. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, gentlemen. Further debate on the motion. Lady from 18.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate against the bill.
Lady has the floor.
Thank you. I just want to build on some of the points made by my good colleague here from 17. So when this bill, and I sat on the underlying committee, when this bill was brought to us, it was initially pitched as something needs to be done because these soft judges are giving out fines as low as $2, so we got to set a threshold minimum. Well, I wanted to dig a little bit. I did hand out the record of the underlying case that triggered all this. And when you look at it, this was for possession of a very small amount of marijuana for personal use. This was not somebody who crashed a car. This was not somebody who was dealing. And yes, there was a $2.50 fine. They were also sentenced to 180 days in jail, placed on 12 months probation, given 100 hours of community service, and given court costs that totaled about $650. So I actually think if you ask the average person in Idaho, what do you think of this penalty for a person who possessed a small amount of marijuana for personal use? I think your average person would think, whoa, that's maybe some overkill. That's a really heavy duty fine for what a lot of people would consider a fairly minor offense. I don't think we're in a crisis here where we need to set astronomically higher fines. We're now talking about adding another $300 to it, so you'd be looking at $1,000, which, as those of you who looked at your BSU survey know, that 50% of Idahoans could not pay a $1,000 hit if they were ever hit with it. They don't have $1,000 in their account or access to it. So again, this bill is not about legalizing marijuana. It's not about whether it's good for you. It's about whether we're going to set this mandatory minimum penalty on it. And I wanted to put a little bit more flesh on some of the testimony we heard in committee, because some of it's personal to me. One of the testimonials that my good friend from up north referenced was very compelling. It was from a gentleman named Sergeant Kitzhaber, who served in the U.S. Air Force for over 20 years, was a decorated American hero, and in the course of his work for our nation, he was asked to carry toxic chemicals. He was not given adequate protective gear, and he now has incurable terminal cancer throughout his entire abdomen. Has had to have more than a dozen surgeries, has had organs removed, extensive parts of his intestines removed. He is in constant agony. And his only alternative is opioids, which completely destroy his system. He's actually had to be hospitalized several times from the impact the opioids have on his system. And really the only safe painkiller he can take is cannabis. This is not a guy who's seeking to use this for fun. This is a guy who is medically forced, and all of his cancer doctors are saying the only thing that can save you in this circumstance is medical cannabis. Again, this bill is not about medical cannabis, but it is about whether we're going to make the lives of folks like Sergeant Kitzhaber even harder. And he's not alone. He works with dozens and dozens of veterans who are in the same boat and who are forced to turn to this for their treatment. And they weren't all as brave to come out and tell their stories, but their stories are very real. So really the question is, are we going to hold them to an even more harsh standard than they already face under Idaho law? And this gets to the question of judicial discretion. This is why we have judicial discretion, so that a judge can hear all the facts of the case and look at somebody and say, you know what, you're just some punk, you're a repeat offender, we're going to give you the max. Or look at somebody and say, you know what, you're maybe a little bit different. You're a first-time offender, or maybe you're a person who's trying to bring a wife who's trying to bring cannabis home to your husband who's dying of cancer. And it gives them that little bit of flexibility to give a sentence that matches the crime. And what this bill does is strip that away to some extent. And I don't think that's the right thing to do. I got to say, every time that I've heard judicial discretion attacked in my many years here, when you look at the underlying case, the judges are usually right. When you look at it, there's usually a pretty darn good reason for their sentence. And this takes away that power for them to do that, for them to tailor that case and to tailor the punishment to the crime insofar as it goes. Now, we've heard a lot about deterrence, but deterrence isn't the only thing our criminal justice system is supposed to accomplish. It has a variety of things it's trying to accomplish, because if it were only deterrence, we would chop people's hands off for shoplifting or give the death penalty for every offense. We have more things we're trying to accomplish than that with the criminal justice system. We're trying to accomplish certainly punishment, rehabilitation, proportionality, justice. And let's talk about proportionality. As my good colleague mentioned, this would make possession of a small amount of marijuana for personal use a more severe crime by means of penalty than strangulation, domestic battery, stalking, DUI, bribery of a public servant, aggravated assault. Again, getting back to my person on the street test, if you walked up to just about any Idahoan in the state and said, what do you think is a more serious crime? Possession of a gummy in your pocket for personal use, or attempted strangulation, or DUI, or stalking? I have a pretty good idea of what pretty much every single person in the state of Idaho would say to that question. They would say, we've got this upside down. This is not a more serious offense than any of those things. And not that I'm saying we should have mandatory minimums for everything. I think we should stick with the principle of judicial discretion across the board. And I just don't think it makes sense to single out this one offense and treat it so much more harshly than everything else in our whole sphere of misdemeanors. Nor do I think it's needed. We have not had this law on the books before. We are not Portland. We are not Seattle. We don't need it. Judges are doing a great job with the discretion that they have. Marijuana will still be illegal. It would still be subject to extremely harsh penalties without this bill. And I wanted to just briefly debunk the idea that, $300 isn't a big deal. There was a number thrown out that marijuana costs $240. That's for an ounce of highly pure. I don't know what that was talking about, but an average gummy, I think, would be about $2. So again, piling on the court costs, you're talking about $1,000 penalty. A person who can afford a $2 gummy, it does not follow that they have $1,000 to pay this fine. So this would actually be extremely severe and would put a lot of people in hock for a very long time. So again, I think this really puts our justice system out of whack. I think it's very disproportionate, and I don't think it's necessary. So I hope you'll give it your red light.
Okay, good ladies. Further debate on the motion. Hearing done with the good gentleman 26.
Mr. Speaker, to debate, please.
Gentleman has the floor.
I personally agree with all the reason, rationale the good sponsor has brought with this. My concern is just relevance of the crime. Whether you raise the end result of the cost to somebody that does this is $400 or $1,000. If they're not feeding their kids and they're not going to pay it, my question is, what's the relevance of it? My concern from a devil's advocate is shifting jail time over to simply a monetary fine. Some people have the money to pay it, and the pain threshold, if you will, isn't that high. I like leaving the decision to our judges at their discretion, and instead of putting on a fine, I'm fine with no monetary fine, and throw their pants in the slammer for a while to let them think about it. And to me, I don't want to take that discretion away from the judge as they apply it to somebody. In summary, the punishment needs to be relevant to the person doing the crime.
Further debate on the motion. Gentleman 2.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate in favor.
Gentleman has the floor.
So we keep talking about the judge's discretion. I want to remind everybody that court costs are not fines. Court costs are incurred by everybody who goes to court for a criminal action or a misdemeanor or a felony. And in the state of Idaho, I heard it brought up today that this is greater and more serious in a fine than it is for strangulation. Attempted strangulation in the state of Idaho is a felony, and you can be put in prison for up to 15 years for that. That's not what we're talking about. As far as discretion, this is a minimum fine. The judge can fine from $300 to $1,000. The jail time is 0 days to a year in jail. And in the case that was read, it was said that it was 180 days in jail. It wasn't read that it was 178 days suspended. So they spent 2 days in jail.
Oh, come on.
I do not believe, and I would ask the gentleman from 17, if that would be okay, Mr. Speaker, for a question.
Did the gentleman from 17 yield to a question?
Yes, to the gentleman from
Gentleman yields.
Good gentleman, you had said that, speaking of Ada County, you implied that all are given 100 hours of community service. Is that just a given? That's a minimum in Ada County, or is that at the discretion of the judge as well?
Good gentleman, 17.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good gentleman from 2. I believe that's what was presented to us in committee. I don't practice criminal law, so I can't answer that question specifically. But the public defender, one of the senior public defenders in Ada County, said that who handles these cases every day. They know what the sentences are and what they aren't. She said that in Ada County it was 100 hours of community service. That's the source. And I can't tell you I personally know that because I don't practice criminal law.
Gentleman 2.
Thank you, good gentleman. So, Mr. Speaker, I would go on that this is just another area where judges have discretion. There may not be any community service. There may not be any jail time. There may be as low as a $300 fine. The judges still have discretion, and it's like our good gentleman from 10 said, he hasn't heard from any judges that are against this, so we're hearing a lot of people saying we're taking away from them.
There's about 1,000 judges.
But those who have been in contact with them, that's not what we're hearing. I think this is a good
They
law
stay
for
out of
Idaho.
legislation,
I don't
usually
think we
judges.
want to ever slip into what our neighbor to the west has done, who, by the way, is backing out of their decisions very quickly with their decriminalization of drugs. It has destroyed their infrastructure. It's destroyed their people. Their mental health crisis is going through the ceiling. So anything we can do that will act as a deterrent, I think, is a good thing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, gentlemen. For the motion, for the debate on the motion. Hearing done with gentlemen from 11, 10, care to close. Oops, sorry, Mark. Gentleman from 1.
Mark works for me, thank you. Just a point, I'm not sure about all of you. I called home on this one. The judge that I spoke with said, leave this one alone. We need the discretion. We want the local control. Ultimately, they're even on our ballots. So you could probably figure out where I stand on this. So I like the local control. The judge that I speak with is very conservative, identifies as the most conservative in the building. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Further debate on the motion. Gentleman 25.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the good lady from 18 yield to a question.
Lady from 18 yield to a question.
The lady yields.
Lady yields.
Thank you. On your handout that identified the $2.50 fines and the $454 of court costs, I don't have the experience in the court. Does the judge have any discretion on the court costs?
Good lady from 18.
My understanding, and I don't practice in criminal law either, good gentleman, Mr. Speaker. My understanding is that the court costs can be suspended later by the court, but I would invite somebody who has more knowledge on this to jump in. But I don't know that they are discretionary.
Thank you, lady. Gentleman 25.
Well, my question, and I'll ask it to maybe someone can get up and answer this later, but my concern is that I believe that court costs are discretionary But the reason that the court costs, this is my belief, is the court costs are specific to the court that the judge is sitting in, whereas the fines are split between a variety of different agencies, and so the judges have had a tendency to have lower fines but collect their court costs. I could be incorrect, but that's the way I understood it.
Thank you, gentlemen. Is there further debate on the motion? Gentleman 24.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to debate in favor of the bill, and I appreciate a greater context from my colleagues to the left of the aisle.
Gentleman has the floor to debate in favor of the motion.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to reiterate that the good gentleman from District 10 did remind us that there is discretion in every basically avenue along the way. And I also wanted to discuss something about the optics. As Liberty legislators in here, many of us we do not like giving mandatory minimums at all. But I do want to discuss the moral issues, the optics, and really the logistics of it. In regards to optics, the gentleman who was testifying in favor of the bill, an officer, had spoken in basically the reality that the optics from out of state is that Idaho is extra tough on crime in respects to drugs. Don't go there. If you are, be careful. I think we need to maintain as much of that as possible. If we can maintain an optic that says you will be punished, that crime does not pay, in fact it costs, and it costs extra, that is a good thing. I also want to talk about the logistics of it. If we begin soft, right? The enemy always comes in subtly. If we begin to be soft on some of these issues that are already illegal, we have the logistics that follow suit. According to that same officer, he agrees that it is a gateway drug. In his experience through the years, he's seen marijuana evolve into greater drugs, more dangerous drugs. With that comes a greater moral decline, and we have greater crimes as theft and some of these others that were discussed, including murder. Where does it stop? It comes at a greater moral cost and a greater fiscal cost in the long run, with detriment to our state. So I just want to remind us that this is about a substance that's already illegal. It is not a mandatory minimum for jail time or sentencing. There is discretion involved in every avenue, and we need to make sure that we are seen as a state that is tough on crime, specifically the things that are already illegal. We do not want to open that door. Thank you very much.
Build another jail.
Thank you, gentlemen. For the debate on the motion. Gentleman 30.
Yeah, build them jail.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm actually not going to technically debate, but I do want to shed some light on what has been stated. I am a criminal defense attorney, and I wanted to just address the question of whether court costs are discretionary or not. There's a court cost schedule for misdemeanors in Idaho. That court cost is not discretionary with the court. They have to impose those if a defendant is convicted. There are other costs that some may refer to as court costs, like reimbursement, restitution for the testing and so forth, which has been mentioned. Technically, those are discretionary with the judge. Also, the reimbursement to the public defense fund, if the person is indigent, is a cost that is discretionary with the judge. So hopefully that clarifies. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. First debate on the motion. Hearing none, would gentleman 10 care to close?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Briefly, I do hope you'll give this the green light. And if you can't pay the fine, don't do the crime.
No.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Way to go there, Counselor. Can't wait for the doors to open, eh?
Clerk will unlock the machine. The members of the council.
Come on, we'll take your case. Oh my goodness.
Has every member voted?
Oh my goodness.
Does any member wish to change their vote? Clerk will lock the machine and report the pairs.
Kaler votes aye. Egbert votes nay.
54 ayes, 14 nays, 2 absent and excused. Majority having voted in favor of House Bill 7. House Bill 7 has passed the House. Is there correction to title?
No correction to title.
Hearing none, the title is approved. Bill will be transmitted to the Senate.